There's a moment that happens in every power struggle where you have a choice. You can defend yourself, explain your position, prove you're right, prove they're wrong. Or you can do something that most people find terrifying. You can say nothing. You can let them attack your reputation, misrepresent your words, twist your intentions, and you don't defend yourself. And in that moment, something shifts. Something that Niccolo Machiavelli understood 500 years ago, and that most modern people have completely forgotten. The moment you defend yourself, you've already lost. Not the argument, the power. Because defense is admission. Defense is acknowledgement that their attack landed. Defense is you dancing to their rhythm instead of setting the tempo yourself. This isn't weakness. This is the opposite. This is the most dangerous move in any conflict. And here's what makes it work. When someone attacks you and you immediately defend, you validate the attack. You say, through your defense, yes, this matters enough to respond to. Yes, I'm concerned about this. Yes, your words have power over me. But when you don't defend, when you simply continue forward as if the attack barely registered, something different happens in their mind. They realize their weapon didn't land. They threw their best punch, and you didn't even flinch. And that uncertainty, that confusion about whether they actually got through to you, that creates a crack in their confidence. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, won't people just believe the lies if I don't correct them? Won't the narrative become accepted truth? And here's where most people misunderstand the entire dynamic. Yes, some people will believe the lie, but those people were probably going to believe it anyway. You can't argue someone out of a position they didn't argue themselves into. But the people who matter, the people who are actually worth impressing, they don't decide based on rumours. They decide based on evidence. They decide based on their actual experience with you. Think about the last time someone tried to provoke you. Maybe they insulted you, questioned your competence, challenged your integrity, and you felt that immediate surge, that need to explain, to correct the record, to make sure they understood the truth about you. That impulse, that's the trap. Because the person attacking you doesn't actually care about the truth. They care about getting a reaction. They care about pulling you into their frame, their game, their reality. And the moment you start defending, you've agreed to play on their terms. What they want most is your attention. What they want most is to know that their attack landed. What they want most is to pull you into a debate where both sides are arguing, both sides are reactive, both sides are desperately trying to convince observers. Because in that state of mutual combat, the attacker has achieved something remarkable. They've made you dance to their music. They've made you care about what they think. They've made you prove your worth by responding to their accusations. This is why some of the worst people in the world are the ones who engage most readily with critics. They're constantly defending themselves. They're constantly explaining. And in doing so, they're constantly reinforcing the narrative that they need to defend themselves. They're constantly confirming that the accusations matter, that the attacks landed, that they're worried about their reputation. Machiavelli wrote extensively about this dynamic, though he phrased it differently. He understood that power belongs to those who can remain unmoved by the opinions of others. He watched rulers destroy themselves not through military defeat, but through their need to be seen as righteous, as honest, as victimized. They would issue proclamations defending themselves against accusations, and in doing so, they would amplify the accusations. More people would hear the rumor because the ruler felt compelled to deny it. The ruler's defense became the vehicle for spreading the very thing they were defending against. This is a law that plays out constantly in modern life, and we rarely see it because we're trained from childhood to defend ourselves. When someone blames you, you're taught to explain. When you're accused of something, you're supposed to correct the record immediately. When your character is questioned, conventional wisdom says you should address it head-on. But this is exactly backward. Let me tell you about someone named Marcus who understood this principle intuitively, though he probably didn't know Machiavelli. Marcus worked in a competitive corporate environment where reputation and perception determined everything. There was another executive, let's call him David, who was trying to undermine Marcus's position. David started spreading a narrative that Marcus was taking credit for other people's work, that he was climbing the ladder on the backs of his team. This accusation came from someone with credibility, someone inside the organization. People believed it, at least initially. The narrative gained traction. People started watching Marcus differently, interpreting his actions through this lens. Was he really collaborating, or was he just positioning himself? Was he really helping his team, or was he setting them up to fail so he'd look better? The whole frame became suspicious. But here's what Marcus did. He didn't call a meeting to defend himself. He didn't send an email rebutting the accusations point by point. He didn't go around the office explaining his side of the story, trying to convince people of the truth. Instead, he continued his work. He gave his team credit publicly, more credit than before. He became more collaborative, more visible in his support of others. He elevated team members into positions of higher visibility. And he did this not because he was defending himself, but because it was the right thing to do anyway. He separated his actions from his defense entirely. But watch what happened. Months later, when people had actually worked with Marcus and experienced his leadership directly, they came to their own conclusions about David's accusations. They didn't believe the narrative anymore because reality contradicted it so obviously. The accusation simply couldn't compete with lived experience. When you work with someone, when you see how they treat people, when you experience their actual character in real time, no rumor can stand against that. And David, who had been so focused on attacking Marcus's reputation, looked increasingly bitter, increasingly desperate. His attacks became more aggressive, more obvious, and this made him look unhinged rather than Marcus look guilty. The pattern became visible. David kept attacking, while Marcus kept building. David kept criticizing, while Marcus kept creating. David kept complaining, while Marcus kept succeeding. Eventually, people stopped listening to David because David seemed obsessed with Marcus, while Marcus seemed focused on the actual work. This is the Machiavellian move. You don't fight fire with fire. You don't defend yourself with words. You defend yourself with action. You let your behavior be your defense. You embody your counter-narrative through how you live. And meanwhile, the person attacking you expends all their energy, all their credibility, on accusations that seem to matter less and less as time passes. They burn out. They lose allies. They start to look like they have an agenda rather than legitimate concerns. There's something deeper happening here. Something about how human psychology works and how power actually functions in groups. When you defend yourself vigorously, you create a kind of stalemate. You both have claims. Both have narratives, and reasonable people can disagree about who's right. But when you refuse to engage in the defense, when you simply move forward, you create a vacuum. And vacuums get filled with doubt, not certainty. The attacker expected you to defend. They expected you to care enough to correct the record. When you don't, it creates cognitive dissonance in observers. Why isn't he defending himself? Either what was said isn't true and doesn't need defending, or he's so confident it doesn't matter to him. Either way, the attacker's frame starts to collapse. And here's what's really happening at the psychological level. When you defend yourself, you're signaling that the attack has power over you. You're showing you care deeply about what people think. This gets encoded in observers' minds. They notice. They know how to manipulate you now. But when you don't defend, when you remain unmoved, you send the opposite signal. You're saying this attack is beneath your concern. You have bigger fish to fry. This narrative isn't worth your time. This is immensely powerful. Observers can't predict how to get under your skin. They can't find the vulnerability. And that unpredictability, that invulnerability, creates respect and fear in equal measure. I've seen this play out in public spaces too. There's a whole genre of internet dynamics built on people defending themselves against accusations. Someone gets accused of something, they immediately post a long explanation, a video, a statement. And what happens? The accusation spreads farther because now there's content attached to it. There's the original accusation, and then there's the defense, and people watch the back and forth like entertainment. Algorithm after algorithm will show the drama to more people. The algorithm feeds on engagement, and a defense creates engagement. People want to watch the argument unfold. They want to see both sides. They want to form their own opinions about who's right. So they spread both the accusation and the defense. The person being accused thinks they're winning because they're explaining their side, but they're actually feeding the narrative. They're keeping the accusation alive. They're creating content that the algorithm loves. They're extending the conversation far beyond its natural lifespan. Meanwhile, people who never engage, who let accusations pass without comment, often escape relatively unscathed because there's nothing to talk about. The drama needs two participants. The moment one refuses to play, the momentum dies. You can't have a conversation with someone who won't talk back. You can't have a fight with someone who won't fight. You can't sustain a narrative that nobody's feeding. And so these things fade into background noise. Some people remember the accusation. Some people believe it. But without new content, without fresh engagement, without the accused person constantly reviving it through their defense, it just becomes another internet rumor that nobody really cares about anymore. But this requires something that most people don't have in abundance: restraint. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood. It requires you to tolerate the anxiety of not correcting the record. It requires you to watch people believe things about you that aren't true and not immediately move to fix it. This is genuinely difficult because we have a deep psychological need to be seen accurately, to be understood, to have our intentions recognized correctly. The idea that you would let someone misrepresent you, that you would allow a false narrative to circulate, that feels like violence. It feels like allowing injustice. It feels like betraying yourself. And most people can't handle that feeling. So they defend, they explain, they try to set the record straight. And in doing so, they almost always make things worse. But here's the paradox. The moment you try to fight that feeling by defending yourself, you lose. The moment you try to correct the record, you strengthen it. You're feeding the beast. You're giving it oxygen. You're making the attack seem important enough to require a response. And here's the hidden cost that most people don't realize. Every time you defend yourself, you're teaching people that attacks work on you. You're creating a training signal that says, if you attack this person, they will respond. They will engage. They will care. And once people know that, once that pattern is established, they'll keep attacking because they know it works. But if you never respond, if you let attacks pass without comment, eventually people stop attacking because they realize it doesn't work. There's no reward. There's no engagement. There's no satisfaction. So they look for someone more reactive. Machiavelli understood that rulers who seemed most worried about their reputation, who worked hardest to control their image, were actually the most vulnerable. Because they were reactive. They were dancing to someone else's tune. The powerful rulers, the ones who lasted, were indifferent to rumor and accusation. They moved on their own agenda. They acted in their own interest. And when accusations came, they either ignored them entirely or addressed them incidentally as they pursued what they actually cared about, never as a primary focus. This doesn't mean you should be indifferent to justice or to correcting genuine injustice. It means you have to be selective. It means you don't treat every attack as an emergency requiring immediate response. Some attacks require response, but most don't. Most are tests. Someone attacks you to see if you'll react. If you do react, you've told them their attack works on you. If you don't, you've told them they don't have power over you. And in a world where so much is about perception and power dynamics, that's a crucial message to send. Think about how this applies to different scenarios. If someone gossips about you, Telling the truth about what was said usually doesn't stop the gossip. It just adds new details. But if you never acknowledge the gossip, if you act as if you're unaware and unbothered, the gossip eventually seems petty. If someone accuses you of wrongdoing publicly, defending yourself publicly often just extends the conversation. But if you address the issue privately and appropriately, without making a public spectacle of your response, the narrative can't sustain itself. If someone questions your competence, proving your competence through results over time is stronger than explaining why you're competent. There's a timing element to this that's important too. Sometimes the right response to an attack is delayed, not immediate. You don't respond in the heat of the moment. You let time pass. You let the attacker wonder if they got through to you. You let observers lose interest in the initial accusation. And then, if you choose to address it at all, you do so from a position of complete calm, almost as an afterthought. Not with the desperation of someone who's been stewing in anger and hurt. This delay communicates something powerful. It says that you were so unmoved by the attack that you didn't even think about it for days or weeks. It communicates that you have much bigger things to think about. It communicates power. Machiavelli also wrote about the importance of controlling your own narrative, your own story. And the counterintuitive part of this is that you control it best not by talking about it constantly, not by defending it, but by living it, by embodying it, by showing it through action. Your life becomes your defense, and nobody can argue with that. They can argue with your words. They can dispute your version of events, but they can't argue with results. They can't argue with the kind of person you actually are when they interact with you, when they see your behavior over time. This is why some of the most powerful people in the world, the ones with the deepest influence, are often the least visible defenders of their own reputation. They simply don't need to be. Everyone who matters already knows who they are. And everyone who doesn't matter won't be swayed by their defense anyway. So why waste the energy? There's also a competitive angle to this. When your opponent is attacking you and you're defending, you're both in a state of conflict. You're both mobilized. You're both focused on the same battle. But when you refuse to defend, when you redirect your energy elsewhere, you're on a completely different playing field. You're not in the game they want to play. You're building something else, pursuing something else, becoming something else, and that's exhausting for your opponent, because they're still focused on the battle, still looking for your reaction, still expecting to engage with you. But you've walked away. Not physically, but mentally, strategically. You've made the conscious decision that this particular conflict isn't where your power lies. This is related to what Sun Tzu wrote about warfare. The best victory is won without fighting. And not defending yourself is a form of not fighting. You're denying your opponent the satisfaction of conflict. You're denying them the narrative they want, which is you desperate to correct the record, you pleading your case, you proving they hurt you. Instead, they get nothing, and that nothing is more powerful than any response could be. There's a distinction worth making, though. Not defending yourself doesn't mean not explaining when it matters. If you're in a courtroom, if there's a legal proceeding, you defend yourself through the proper channels with your lawyer. If you're in a professional setting and there's a formal investigation, you address it through the proper process. But the everyday stuff, the rumors, the gossip, the social media attacks, the people trying to undermine your reputation in casual conversation, most of that doesn't deserve your attention. Most of that will resolve itself if you simply let it. The people worth impressing will form opinions based on their actual interactions with you. The people not worth impressing will believe what they want regardless of what you say. So defending yourself primarily communicates with a third group, the people who are on the fence, the people who are undecided. And here's the thing about the undecided people. Your defense rarely moves them. What moves them is evidence. What moves them is experience. What moves them is watching how you behave over time. This is why character assassination only works if the target cooperates by freaking out. The moment the target refuses to be moved, the assassination loses its power. Because character isn't decided by what someone says about you. Character is demonstrated by what you do, how you treat people, what you build, what you stand for when no one's watching. And none of that gets better by defending yourself against accusations. If anything, it gets worse because you're spending your time defending instead of building. Machiavelli would call this a fundamental misallocation of your energy. You're investing in a battle you can't win while abandoning the actual game. The actual game is moving forward. The actual game is becoming more skilled, more knowledgeable, more powerful, more valuable. Every moment spent defending yourself is a moment not spent on that. And the person who understands this, the person who refuses to be drawn into defense, wins by default. Because while everyone else is arguing, they're advancing. While everyone else is litigating the past, they're building the future. This doesn't mean you should never address accusations at all. Sometimes you should. But you should do it strategically. You should do it from a place of abundance, not desperation. You should do it because it serves your larger purpose, not because you can't stand being misunderstood. And you should do it only when the audience you're addressing actually matters. Most of the time, they don't. Most of the time, the best response is simply to continue being the person you claim to be. To live in a way that contradicts the accusations without ever mentioning them. To succeed in a way that makes the attack seem petty. To rise in a way that makes the people attacking you look like they're standing still. This is the Machiavellian trick that nobody wants to hear about because it requires faith. It requires faith in yourself. It requires faith in reality. It requires faith that if you're actually a good person, actually a capable person, actually a trustworthy person, that will eventually become obvious. And it requires patience. You have to tolerate a period where you're misunderstood. You have to sit with people believing negative things about you. You have to resist the urge to correct them. This is hard, but it's also the only response that actually works. The moment you defend, you're no longer in control. You're responding. You're reactive. You're letting someone else dictate your actions. But the moment you refuse to defend, the moment you simply continue forward, you're back in control. You're being proactive. You're dictating your own behavior. And that, in the end, is what power actually is. It's the freedom to act in your own interest without needing permission or validation from anyone else. It's the ability to move forward regardless of what people are saying about you. It's the refusal to be drawn into other people's frames. Machiavelli understood that this kind of power is rare because it requires not just intelligence, but also character. It requires the ability to distinguish between the attacks that matter and the ones that don't. It requires wisdom about which battles are worth engaging in. It requires humility to admit when you've actually done something wrong and address that separately from defending yourself against frivolous accusations. But for those who master it, who can sit in the discomfort of being misunderstood without needing to correct the record, who can watch people attack them and simply continue forward, there is a kind of power that nobody else possesses. Because nobody can move you. Nobody can distract you. Nobody can pull you off your path. And in a world of people constantly reacting to what others are saying about them, constantly defending, constantly explaining, constantly trying to control their image, a person who's simply unmoved by that entire dynamic is effectively invisible to it. They can't be touched by the attacks because they don't treat them as relevant. They can't be manipulated by the accusations because they don't feel the need to respond. They can't be controlled by the judgment because they're not trying to win the judgment. So the question becomes, are you willing to try this? Are you willing to sit with being misunderstood? Are you willing to let people believe things about you that aren't true, at least temporarily? Are you willing to give up the immediate satisfaction of defending yourself for the long-term power of being unmoved? Because if you are, if you can master this one thing, if you can refuse the bait of defense and simply continue forward, you'll find that most of the attacks that seem so serious right now will fade into irrelevance. The people attacking you will eventually move on to someone more reactive, and you'll be building something real while they were busy fighting ghosts. That's the trick. That's the move. Not defending yourself isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strength. And most people will never understand that until it's too late.